This near-death experience story comes from Daniel Morgan, a 40-year-old American man who had everything: success, freedom, and a busy life, but felt deeply disconnected from something unseen. On a solo hiking trip, Daniel unexpectedly collapsed, and for several minutes he was clinically unresponsive. But what he experienced in those minutes would forever change his understanding of reality. Instead of darkness or fear, he encountered a peaceful intelligence beyond this world, one that showed him powerful truths about life, purpose, and the next evolution of humanity. His journey wasn't just for him. It was a wake-up call for starseeds everywhere. The burnout that shattered his routine. Daniel had spent years pushing himself without pause, working long hours, building his business, and carrying the weight of perfectionism. On the surface, he had everything society defined as success, but inside, he felt an increasing numbness. He couldn't explain it, but something essential was missing. A deep longing pulled at him, one he had ignored for years by keeping busy. He thought a weekend hiking trip into the wilderness would clear his mind and reset his focus. But as the trees closed in and the signal bars disappeared, so did his sense of control over what was to come. The first day of his solo hike passed uneventfully, but on the second day, he felt a strange pressure in his chest and dizziness that he tried to brush off. Then, while resting against a rock overlooking a quiet lake, he blacked out. He didn't stumble or cry out. He just slipped into silence. When he collapsed, there were no witnesses. For several minutes, his heart rhythm slowed to a near halt. What he thought would be a peaceful escape from stress became the gateway to something entirely unexpected, something far more real than anything he'd ever known. The silent collapse and the out-of-body shift. As Daniel's physical body lay still on the forest trail, his awareness didn't end. In fact, it expanded. He felt himself rise, not in panic, but in quiet awe. He could see his body from above, slumped peacefully near the tree line. But he felt no fear. Everything around him took on a surreal clarity. Colors were brighter, time seemed suspended, and a calm intelligence embraced him. He wasn't alone, and yet there was no one else there. He was simply aware, completely and peacefully aware. Floating above his body, Daniel realized how heavy life had become, not just physically, but energetically. The burdens, the pressure, the inner void. It all looked so small from here. There was a distinct separation between what he thought was his identity and the pure observer he had now become. He couldn't feel his heart beating, yet his consciousness was fully alive. He had no words, no breath, no fear, and yet he felt more real than ever. Something was guiding this shift, something he couldn't see, but deeply trusted. Entering the 0-point field, Daniel suddenly found himself in a space without shape, direction, or time. It wasn't dark, yet there was no light. It was pure stillness, a silence so deep that it vibrated. He didn't feel like he was floating anymore. He simply was. This void wasn't empty. It was alive with intelligence, humming with a peaceful vibration that made him feel completely safe. He wasn't anxious. In fact, he felt more at home than he ever had in his life. It was like returning to the very source of everything. Thoughts didn't occur the same way in this space. Instead of thinking, he just knew. Questions were met with instant understanding. There was no ego, no story, no past or future, just presence. Daniel knew he was being prepared for something, but he didn't know what. Every part of him felt neutral and balanced, as though he had returned to the original point of his soul's blueprint. This place, which he later called the 0-point field, was not an end. It was a sacred stillness before revelation. The voice beyond thought. From within the stillness, a presence emerged, not visually, but energetically. It was kind, vast, and somehow familiar, like an old friend he had forgotten. It didn't speak in words but delivered meaning directly to his awareness. The message wasn't loud, it was complete. Daniel understood that he was not experiencing death in the way humans often imagine it. He was in a transition space, and he had reached it by design. He hadn't been taken. It had been allowed, because he was ready to awaken to his next level of consciousness. This presence told him, without speaking, that he had reached a soul threshold. Life on Earth had reached a point where many would begin to awaken to their deeper purpose, and Daniel, like countless others, had been living asleep to his own multidimensional nature. The voice conveyed deep love and patience. There was no pressure, only invitation. He could choose to return, but he first needed to understand who he truly was, and why he had come to Earth in this lifetime. This was not a punishment. It was a preparation. Encoded light patterns that spoke truth. As the presence faded, the space around Daniel filled with light, not just brightness, but intricate, moving patterns of light. These weren't just visual, they were alive. They pulsed with intelligence, shifting into sacred shapes, spirals, and geometric codes that embedded meaning directly into him. With every shape, he felt downloads of information. No one was explaining it to him, but he understood. These codes were the original language of creation, and they were awakening his dormant memory. Each pattern seemed to activate something within his soul. Visions, feelings, recognitions. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. The codes showed him timelines, soul contracts, universal structures, and even blueprints of healing frequencies. They didn't just inform, they transformed. As the patterns flowed through him, Daniel felt years of confusion melt away. He remembered why he had always felt different, why he never fully belonged. These codes were preparing him to see beyond the illusion, and to carry that clarity back into the physical world. His purpose was becoming crystal clear, and this was only the beginning. Awakening his Starseed memory. The light codes kept flowing through Daniel, and then something extraordinary began to happen. He started seeing scenes that didn't belong to this lifetime. Visions of distant planets, advanced civilizations, and experiences that felt more familiar than his current life. He saw himself as part of interstellar communities, contributing knowledge, healing, and guidance. These weren't fantasies or dreams. They came with emotion, with memory, and with clarity that surpassed any earthly understanding. These weren't stories being told to him. He was remembering something deep within his soul. Daniel realized he was what some call a starseed, a soul that originated from beyond Earth, choosing to incarnate here during this time of transition. The heaviness he had always felt in the physical world suddenly made sense. He hadn't understood it before, but now it was clear. He had volunteered to come into a dense reality to assist in humanity's shift. His struggles weren't signs of failure. They were part of the forgetting required to be here. And now, the remembering had begun. The veil was lifting, and he was seeing with soul eyes. Understanding Earth as a soul school. Daniel was gently shown Earth from a higher perspective, not as a place of chaos and suffering, but as a brilliantly designed soul school. He saw how each experience, no matter how difficult, served a purpose in a larger tapestry of evolution. Earth was unlike other realms. It offered polarity, emotion, and the illusion of separation, so that souls could grow faster and develop deeper wisdom. He felt compassion for himself and for humanity, understanding that this life wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be transformative. He saw how each soul chose specific lessons before incarnating. Some chose abandonment, others wealth, some illness, and others fame, all as tools for growth. The experiences weren't punishments, they were sacred arrangements. From this view, nothing was random. Daniel realized that even his burnout, his collapse, and his temporary death were all perfectly timed activations. They weren't interruptions. They were the curriculum. Earth wasn't broken. It was sacred. And those who awakened to this truth were being called to help others remember too. The mirror of emotional mastery. Suddenly, Daniel was surrounded by energetic mirrors, living reflections of his past choices, relationships, and emotional reactions. But these weren't just memories. He re-experienced key moments of his life, not from his perspective, but through the hearts of others. He felt what his silence had done to someone who needed his voice, and the quiet power of his kindness to someone he had long forgotten. There was no judgment, only understanding. Emotions were not flaws. They were gateways to mastery. He was shown how his reactions, especially during moments of stress or heartbreak, had created energy ripples that shaped his path. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about alignment. Fear had often led him to shrink, while love had expanded everything. He saw how forgiveness released energy blockages and how courage opened doors to new timelines. This wasn't about fixing the past. It was about choosing differently from this point forward. Mastering emotion wasn't suppression. It was learning to respond with awareness, rather than react with fear. Meeting the Council of Light, Daniel found himself in a circular chamber of soft, radiant light. Standing around him were tall beings, glowing not with authority, but with wisdom and grace. Their eyes held peace so deep it felt like being wrapped in eternity. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was enough. This was a council, not of control, but of guidance. Each one radiated a different frequency, like a choir of energies, harmonizing together in one silent vibration of love. He understood instinctively that these beings were not here to lecture, but to assist. They weren't above him, nor did they claim power. Instead, they celebrated his courage, his journey, and his willingness to remember. You are not here to be rescued, he felt them convey. You are here to embody light where others have forgotten it exists. Daniel's soul recognized them, not from books or teachings, but from lifetimes spent in similar service. These were soul allies, returning to remind him that he was never doing this alone. Receiving the blueprint activation, one of the council members stepped forward, their hand made of pure radiant energy. Without touching him physically, they placed their palm over Daniel's heart space. A warmth spread through him, deeper than heat, vibrational, ancient, alive. He felt layers of resistance dissolve, as if parts of his soul that had been dormant were being reawakened. In that instant, Daniel felt a direct activation of his soul's blueprint, the original purpose he had agreed to before coming to Earth. It was as if invisible scrolls within him were unrolling. He suddenly knew things he had never studied. He understood how energy worked, how intention shaped matter, and how frequency attracted form. But most of all, he remembered that his mission was simple, to be a presence of truth in a world clouded by fear. He didn't need to be loud, famous, or perfect. He only needed to be aligned. And from that alignment, everything else would unfold. His life was not beginning again. It was finally beginning correctly. The energy of the new Earth timeline. Daniel was shown the Earth again, but not in the way he had seen it before. This time, it appeared as two overlapping versions, one pulsing with chaotic, dense energy, and the other glowing with radiant harmony. He instantly understood that these were not different planets but different timelines, shaped by collective human consciousness. The lower version carried fear, separation, and control, while the higher vibrated with unity, creativity, and peace. He saw that people weren't trapped. They were simply aligned with different frequencies based on their beliefs, choices, and emotions. The council gently conveyed that humanity was standing at a tipping point. A shift was already underway, and individuals were being called to consciously choose which version of Earth they wanted to help co-create. Daniel realized that no external force was going to force that decision. It was deeply personal. He saw that every act of compassion, every thought of hope, every decision rooted in love contributed to the emergence of the new Earth. It wasn't a fantasy. It was forming in real time, and he had just been invited to become a conscious builder of it. Why he was chosen to remember now? Daniel asked, without words, why he had been allowed to experience this. Why now? Why him? The answer came not as an explanation, but as a knowing that filled every part of his being. He was not chosen because he was better, smarter, or more deserving. He was simply ready, ready to remember, ready to hold the light of truth without needing to convince anyone else, ready to live a life of soul alignment in a world that desperately needed more light carriers. He saw that many others, scattered across the globe, were experiencing similar awakenings, through dreams, through inner guidance, or through their own near-death moments. The timing was no accident. These awakenings were synchronized like a web of light forming around the planet. The council shared that Daniel's soul had agreed to awaken at this moment, not to teach or lead with force, but to embody remembrance. That embodiment, they said, would speak louder than any words ever could. It wasn't about what he said, it was about who he became. Feeling the collective soul grid. In one moment, Daniel was lifted into an awareness that transcended individual identity. He was shown an energetic grid that linked thousands, maybe millions, of souls across the earth. These weren't strangers. They were familiar, like family he hadn't yet met. He felt their hearts, their hopes, their silent struggles. Many of them, like him, had always felt different. They had questioned everything, sensed truths beneath the surface, and often walked life paths that made them feel alone. But here, in this expanded awareness, Daniel saw that none of them were alone. Each person was like a point of light within a massive crystalline web stretching around the earth. This was the collective Starseed grid, the spiritual infrastructure quietly holding space for the new earth. He saw that when one person remembered their soul purpose, it strengthened the entire network. And when someone dimmed their light out of fear, others could feel the disruption. It was a living, breathing field of unity, and Daniel was now fully connected to it. The joy of alignment with higher self. As the experience deepened, Daniel came face to face with a version of himself he had never met before, but instantly recognized. It was his higher self, an infinite, wise, peaceful presence that radiated unconditional love. This being looked like him, but brighter, calmer, and untouched by fear. No doubt lingered in its expression. No worry about the future. This was who Daniel truly was before he entered the temporary amnesia of Earth, and now that connection had been restored. He felt waves of relief, as though a lifelong search had finally ended. Every answer he had ever sought, every whisper of intuition, had come from this deeper part of him. The higher self didn't lecture or direct. It simply infused him with presence. Daniel understood that his purpose was not to become this higher self, but to align with it in every choice, every breath, every moment. That alignment would become his compass. It would turn ordinary days into sacred paths. The joy he felt was unlike anything he had known. It was the joy of finally coming home to himself. Lessons from the harmonics of thought. Daniel was then shown the vibrational anatomy of thought. He saw how every thought carried a frequency that rippled outward, interacting with other energies in the environment. Positive, loving thoughts created intricate, beautiful harmonies, patterns that resembled sacred geometry. In contrast, negative, fear-based thoughts created distortion and dissonance. It wasn't about morality. It was about energetic impact. His thoughts weren't private. They were active forces shaping not only his world but the collective energy field. He was humbled by this realization. He saw how the smallest judgment or worry could muddy his own energy field, while a single loving intention could illuminate a space like a lantern in darkness. He understood that mastering thought wasn't about controlling every idea. It was about becoming conscious of what he chose to dwell on. Thoughts, he saw, were creative tools, and when aligned with the heart, they could manifest peace, healing, and miracles. The council reminded him gently, "Your thoughts are songs. Choose the ones that create beauty." Releasing the illusion of separation. As Daniel stood immersed in the vibrations of his soul, he was shown the root of most human suffering, the illusion of separation. He was guided through scenes where people believed they were isolated, unloved, or unworthy, and he saw how that belief led to fear, greed, anger, and despair. But then, the illusion was peeled away. He saw how everyone was deeply interconnected, like drops from the same divine ocean. Behind every face, behind every story, was the same spark of consciousness, simply playing a different role in the human experience. Daniel felt waves of compassion rush through him, not just for others, but for himself. He had spent years believing he was alone in his inner battles. Now he saw that everyone was walking a similar path, just in different shoes. The council gently reminded him that unity wasn't about sameness. It was about honoring the divine in all. He realized that judgment dissolves when we see with soul eyes. There was no other. There was only we. And in this realization, a quiet peace settled inside him that would remain even after his return. The re-entry decision point. Daniel was then brought to what felt like a peaceful, sacred crossroad. He sensed the presence of the council surrounding him, not as authorities, but as guides holding space for a decision only he could make. He was given the choice to stay in this state of peace or return to Earth's physical realm. There was no pressure, only love. The thought of returning to the noise, the weight, the uncertainty of the human experience felt heavy. But then he saw the faces of people he loved. He saw those still searching for answers, aching for clarity. And he knew. Daniel chose to return, not because it would be easy, but because it was purposeful. He wasn't being sent back as the same man. He would carry frequencies, awareness, and love that would quietly awaken others. The council offered him a final blessing, a surge of light that embedded into his heart. It was not a message to preach. It was a vibration to carry. He felt his consciousness beginning to descend, slowly merging back with his physical form. He whispered a final thank you, not with words, but with his soul. The return through vibrational descent. Returning wasn't a snap. It was a process. Daniel felt his awareness being layered again with density, sensation, and linear time. The clarity remained, but it now shared space with the heaviness of the human body. His limbs ached, his chest stung, and the air felt thick compared to the purity of the higher realms. But through it all, he was calm. Something had shifted at the core. His mind didn't race as it used to. His heart didn't carry the same weight. He had changed at the blueprint level, and that change would radiate in subtle but powerful ways. Back in his body, Daniel became aware of people rushing around him. He had been found by a fellow hiker, revived by paramedics, and brought to the hospital. As doctors checked his vitals, he lay still, smiling softly. No fear, no confusion, just knowing. The world around him seemed faster, louder, but he no longer felt lost in it. He was grounded in something far deeper. He didn't need to explain what had happened. He just needed to live in alignment with what he now understood. Waking up a new man. When Daniel fully woke in the hospital, there was a quiet brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The doctors were puzzled by how quickly he stabilized. Friends and family commented on his presence, how he seemed different, calmer, more present. He didn't rush to tell everyone about his near-death experience. Instead, he carried it inside like a sacred ember, knowing it would ignite others simply through how he lived. He didn't return with grand speeches. He returned with deep presence. In the weeks that followed, Daniel noticed changes in his daily life. He began waking up with gratitude instead of dread. He approached conversations with genuine listening rather than control. The irritations and worries that once consumed him now passed through like clouds. He was still human, still faced challenges, but the way he held them was new. He was no longer surviving life. He was participating in it, consciously, soulfully, and from a place of deep purpose. He was awake, not just spiritually, but fully alive. A life of purpose and quiet leadership. Daniel didn't become a public speaker or write a best-selling book. Instead, he became something more powerful, a quiet lighthouse. He guided others through his energy, his presence, his integrity. Those who interacted with him often said they felt lighter, calmer, even inspired, though they couldn't quite explain why. He didn't need to prove anything. He knew who he was, why he was here, and what truly mattered. His mission wasn't to convince, but to embody a new way of being. He started mentoring others quietly, helping them trust their own intuition, guiding them to remember their truth. The people who were ready to awaken found him naturally, drawn to the frequency he carried. And in doing so, Daniel fulfilled the reason he returned. Not to be worshipped or followed, but to be a living reminder that the next level of consciousness isn't coming. It's already here. And those who are called to it, the Starseeds, will recognize the truth not by what he says, but by what they feel when they stand in his light.